You wake up every day thinking you're the same man, same thoughts, same habits, same identity. That's the lie. You're not a fixed person. You're a pattern. And your daily actions, that's the code writing who you are, not your intentions, not your dreams, your actions. You don't become strong. You prove it or you expose yourself as weak. Every single day, you're casting a vote. And right now, most of you are voting for a version of yourself you secretly hate. Let me make you uncomfortable. You say you want discipline, power, respect, but your behavior screams the opposite. You scroll instead of build. You hesitate instead of act. You negotiate with weakness like it's your friend. And then you wonder why your identity feels broken. It's not broken, it's accurate. You've trained yourself to be average, and now you're shocked that you feel like nothing. That's not bad luck. That's consistency. Now let's talk about something most people are too soft to understand. Speaking in tongues, not in some mystical, weak, emotional sense. I'm talking about transformation through language internal and external. The words you repeat, the commands you give yourself, the tone you operate in. Weak men speak the language of excuses. Powerful men speak the language of command. You don't hope to change, you instruct yourself to change. You don't whisper, you declare. Your internal dialogue is either building a king or reinforcing a coward. Every time you say, I'll try, you've already lost. That's not language, that's surrender disguised as effort. When you shift your tongue, when you start speaking with authority, precision, and zero tolerance for weakness, you reprogram your identity. You don't wait to feel confident. You speak like a man who already is. And then you act in alignment. That's how identity shifts. Not through motivation, through command and execution. Your daily actions are the physical proof of your internal language. If your words are weak, your actions will be weaker. But when you start speaking with dominance internally and externally, you eliminate negotiation. You say, I trained today, not I feel like training. You say, I win, not I hope I don't lose. That's what separates men who control their lives from those who get dragged through it. Discipline isn't something you wait for, it's something you enforce. You don't ask your mind for permission, you override it, because your mind, left unchecked, is soft. It wants comfort, it wants shortcuts, it wants to keep you safe and mediocre. But power doesn't live there. Power lives in controlled action repeated daily, regardless of emotion. That's how identity is forged through pressure, not preference. You want to know why most men never become who they claim they want to be? Because they never fully commit to a new identity. They dabble, they experiment. They keep one foot in comfort and one foot in ambition, and that split destroys them. There is no halfway transformation. You either become the man or you stay the excuse. There is no middle ground. You think you can define yourself with words. You can't. The world doesn't care what you say you are. It watches what you do. That's the uncomfortable reality most men try to avoid. You might tell people you're disciplined, focused, ambitious. But if your daily actions don't reflect that, then those labels are nothing more than noise. Identity is not declared. It is demonstrated every single day to behavior that either builds you or exposes you. Look closely at your routine, because that's where the truth lives. The moment you hit snooze instead of getting up, you've made a statement. The moment you choose comfort over effort, distraction over focus, ease over challenge, you've cast a vote. Not for who you want to be, but for who you actually are. And those votes stack up. Quietly, consistently, without emotion. You don't wake up one day and become weak or strong. You earn that identity through repetition. Here's where most people get it wrong. They separate intention from action, as if wanting something is somehow equal to doing it. It's not. Intention without execution is self-deception. You don't get credit for plans, ideas, or motivation. You get judged by reality based on what you actually produce. That's why two men can want the same outcome, but only one gets it. One acts, the other talks. If you say you're disciplined but skip training when it's inconvenient, you're not disciplined, you're emotional. If you say you're focused but waste hours scrolling, you're not focused, you're distracted. The gap between what you claim and what you do is where your real identity is exposed. And that gap, it's exactly why most men feel stuck. Because deep down, they know the truth. Their actions don't match their standards. Every behavior you repeat becomes a signal to your brain. It tells you who you are, not who you want to be who you are. When you consistently choose hard over easy, Your mind starts to accept that you are a man of discipline. When you consistently choose comfort, your mind accepts weakness as normal. This is not theory. This is conditioning. You are training yourself every single day, whether you realize it or not. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. You can't fake this. You can't dress it up, talk your way around it, or hide behind potential. Reality doesn't respond to potential. It responds to proof. You either have the habits that align with your desired identity or you don't. There is no middle ground, no partial credit, no exceptions. The man who trains daily, works when he doesn't feel like it, stays focused when it's boring, he doesn't need to say anything. His actions speak so loudly that words become irrelevant. That's power. Silent, undeniable, built through consistency. On the other side, the man who constantly talks about what he's going to do, what he plans to become, what he should be doing. He's building nothing. He's reinforcing a pattern of inaction. You don't become confident by thinking about confidence. You become confident by doing things that require it. You don't become disciplined by reading about discipline. You become disciplined by enforcing standards on yourself daily. Identity is built from evidence, and evidence comes from action. So when you look at your life and feel dissatisfied, don't look at your goals. Look at your habits. Don't analyze your dreams, analyze your behavior, because that's where the answer is. Brutal, clear, and impossible to ignore. Your actions are not just something you do, they are something you become. Every time you hesitate, you're not thinking, you're surrendering. That pause you call considering your options is usually nothing more than weakness, looking for permission. High-level performers don't sit around negotiating with themselves. They don't ask, do I feel like it? They operate on a different standard entirely. Decision, action, execution. No delay, no debate. Because the longer you negotiate, the stronger resistance becomes. You trained yourself into this pattern without realizing it. Every time you delay a task, push something to later, or wait for the right moment, you reinforce hesitation. It becomes your default setting. And once hesitation becomes your default, everything slows down your progress, your confidence, your results. Opportunities don't disappear because you're unlucky. They disappear because you're too busy negotiating with comfort. Understand this clearly. Your mind is not your ally by default. It is designed to protect you, to conserve energy, to avoid discomfort. It will always suggest the easier option. That voice telling you to rest, to wait, to delay it sounds reasonable, but it's not leading you anywhere valuable. If you treat that voice like a partner in decision-making, you will always end up choosing comfort over growth. The strongest individuals don't eliminate that voice. They override it. They hear the resistance and act anyway. That's the difference. Weak men listen and obey. Strong men listen and ignore. There is no negotiation, no compromise, no internal discussion. The standard is already set, and the action follows immediately. Look at how you handle simple decisions. Waking up early, training, starting work, finishing what you begin. In each of these moments, there's a choice. But it's not really a choice, it's a test. And most people fail because they treat it like a debate instead of a command. They give their emotions equal authority. That's the mistake. Emotions are unstable, inconsistent, and unreliable. If you allow them to influence your actions, your performance will always fluctuate. Discipline requires a different approach. You decide once, and then you remove the option to reconsider. If you've committed to waking up at a certain time, there is no second thought when the alarm goes off. You move. If you've committed to training, there is no internal conversation about energy levels or mood. You execute. That's how you build control, by eliminating the space where excuses live. Every negotiation you entertain weakens your authority over yourself. It sends a signal that your standards are flexible, that your commitments are optional. And once that belief takes hold, it spreads. You start negotiating everything, deadlines, effort, focus, until eventually you can't rely on yourself at all. That's when confidence collapses, because you know deep down you don't follow through. On the other hand, when you stop negotiating, something shifts. You begin to trust your own decisions. You say something and it gets done. No delay, no resistance. That consistency builds internal strength. You become predictable, not to others, but to yourself. And that predictability is power. It means you can rely on your own execution regardless of circumstances. This is not about being extreme. It's about being precise. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer options, because options create hesitation, and hesitation kills momentum. When the path is already decided, action becomes automatic. That's where real efficiency comes from. Not from thinking more, but from thinking less and acting faster. You're not stuck because you lack ability. You're stuck because you've made hesitation a habit. You've given your mind too much authority, and now it controls your actions instead of the other way around. Reverse that dynamic. Take back control. Set the standard. Remove the negotiation and execute without delay. The way you speak to yourself is not harmless, it is directive. Every sentence running through your mind is either building structure or eroding it. Most people underestimate this because it's invisible. There's no audience, no accountability, no immediate consequence. But over time, that internal dialogue becomes the script you operate on. And if that script is weak, uncertain, or inconsistent, your actions will follow the same pattern. Pay attention to the tone, not just the words. Saying, "I'll try," might sound neutral, but it carries hesitation. It leaves room for failure before you've even started. Saying, "I'll see how it goes," removes responsibility. It prepares you for retreat. These phrases seem small, but they accumulate. They shape how seriously you take your own commitments. And if you don't take your own words seriously, nothing else will compensate for that. Your mind responds to clarity and authority. When instructions are vague, execution becomes inconsistent. When instructions are precise, action becomes direct. That's why high performers use language that leaves no room for interpretation. They don't say, "I should work today." They say, "I start now." The difference is not cosmetic, it's structural. One creates optional behavior, the other creates immediate action. Most individuals operate with internal language that is reactive rather than proactive. They describe situations instead of directing outcomes. They say, "I'm tired, this is difficult, I don't feel ready." None of these statements move anything forward. They reinforce a passive state. Over time, that passivity becomes identity. You don't just feel unprepared. You start believing that you are. There's also a subtle pattern of self-negotiation hidden in language. Phrases like, "just this once," "I'll make up for it later," or "it's not a big deal," weaken your standards. They create exceptions where there should be none. And once exceptions become acceptable, consistency breaks down. You're no longer operating on principles, you're operating on convenience. Strong internal language eliminates ambiguity. It replaces emotional commentary with instruction. Instead of acknowledging discomfort as a reason to stop, it treats discomfort as irrelevant. The focus shifts from how you feel to what needs to be done. This is not about suppressing emotion, it's about refusing to let emotion dictate direction. Another critical factor is repetition. A single strong statement has limited impact. Repeated consistently, it becomes belief. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you follow through, that you execute, that you don't delay your behavior, starts aligning with that identity. Not because of motivation, but because your mind adapts to the pattern you reinforce. The same is true in reverse. Repeated doubt creates hesitation. Repeated excuses create inaction. You also need to recognize how quickly negative language compounds. One moment of doubt can trigger a chain reaction. You question your ability, then your decision, then your entire direction. Suddenly, you're no longer acting, you're overanalyzing. And while you're stuck in that loop, nothing moves. Strong language interrupts that cycle. It cuts through uncertainty and redirects focus to action. External communication reflects internal structure. If your internal dialogue is weak, it will show in how you speak to others: uncertain tone, hesitant delivery, lack of conviction. When your internal language is sharp and controlled, your external presence becomes more decisive. People respond to that clarity. It signals competence and control without needing to be stated. You are constantly giving yourself instructions, whether you realize it or not. The issue is not whether you are speaking internally. It's whether what you're saying is useful. If your language does not produce action, it is working against you. Replace it with language that commands, directs, and reinforces the standards you expect from yourself. You keep waiting for the right feeling to show up, as if discipline is something that arrives on cue. It doesn't. It never has. The idea that you need to feel ready, energized, or motivated before taking action is one of the most damaging assumptions you can operate under, because it places control outside of you. It turns action into a reaction, and once you live like that, you're no longer in charge. You're responding to whatever state you happen to be in. High-level performance is built on a completely different principle. Action is not tied to mood. It is tied to standard. You don't train because you feel strong. You train because it's scheduled. You don't work because you're inspired. You work because it's required. That separation is critical. When action becomes conditional, consistency disappears. And without consistency, nothing compounds. Most people misunderstand what discipline actually is. They think it's a trait, something you either have or don't. That's incorrect. Discipline is a behavior repeated enforcement of a decision. You decide what needs to be done, and then you follow through regardless of resistance. Not once, not occasionally, but daily. The repetition is what matters, not the intensity, not the excitement, not the initial push. The quiet, consistent execution when nothing feels compelling. That's where discipline is formed. There's always going to be resistance. Fatigue, distraction, boredom, lack of interest, these are not obstacles to discipline. They are the environment it exists in. If you remove resistance, discipline becomes unnecessary. The entire point is to act despite those factors, not in their absence. Waiting for a moment when everything aligns is unrealistic. That moment does not exist. And even if it did, it would not last. You have to understand how unreliable motivation is. It fluctuates based on sleep, stress, environment, even minor inconveniences. If your performance depends on something that unstable, your results will always be inconsistent. You might have days where everything flows, but those are exceptions. What defines your trajectory are the days where nothing feels right and you still execute. There is also a tendency to overestimate how difficult disciplined action needs to be. People imagine extreme effort, long hours, constant intensity. In reality, discipline is often simple. It's showing up when you said you would, starting when you planned to start, finishing what you began. The difficulty is not in the complexity of the task, it's in the decision to begin without relying on emotion. Another critical point is the removal of internal debate. The moment you start asking yourself whether you feel like doing something, you've already introduced friction. You've created space for avoidance. Disciplined individuals reduce that space to zero. The decision is made in advance, and when the time comes, there's no discussion. You act. That's it. Over time, this approach builds a different kind of confidence. Not the kind that comes from success or external validation, but the kind that comes from reliability. You know that when something needs to be done, you will do it. That certainty changes how you approach challenges. You stop questioning your ability to follow through because you've proven it repeatedly. There is no shortcut here. No technique that replaces execution. You either train yourself to act without waiting for motivation, or you remain dependent on it. And dependence creates inconsistency. If you want control, you have to remove that dependency entirely. Act because you decided to, not because you feel like it. One good day means nothing. That's the part most people don't want to accept. You can push hard once, wake up early once, stay focused for a few hours, and convince yourself you're making progress. You're not. You're sampling effort, not building identity. Real power doesn't come from intensity. It comes from repetition. And repetition doesn't care about your mood, your motivation, or your temporary bursts of energy. Consistency is what turns actions into structure. Without it, everything resets. Every time you break your own pattern, you go back to zero, not physically, but mentally. You weaken the link between intention and execution. You send a message to yourself that your standards are flexible, that your commitments can be adjusted depending on how you feel, and once that belief sets in, it spreads into everything you do. Look at how inconsistency shows up. You start strong, then fade. You commit, then delay. You build momentum, then interrupt it. And each time you restart, it feels harder. Not because the task changed, but because your trust in yourself decreased. At some level that you've broken your own word before. That hesitation is not external, it's internal. It's the consequence of repeated inconsistency. Most people focus too much on outcomes and not enough on patterns. They chase results instead of building systems. But results are unstable. They fluctuate. Patterns are what produce them. If your pattern is inconsistent, your results will reflect that. You might get occasional wins, but they won't last because they're not supported by stable structure. There's also misunderstanding about how consistency works. It's not about perfection. It's about continuity. Missing once is not the problem. Making it a habit is. The issue is not the mistake. It's the pattern that follows. Do you correct immediately, or do you allow one break to turn into multiple? That's where most people lose control. They treat small lapses as justification to stop entirely. Consistency requires a level of discipline that goes beyond effort. It requires awareness. You have to monitor your own behavior, identify when you're drifting, and correct it quickly. Not tomorrow, not next week immediately. The longer you allow inconsistency to continue, the harder it becomes to reverse, because you're reinforcing a different identity, one that starts but doesn't finish. There's also the issue of overestimating motivation at the beginning and underestimating resistance over time. Starting is easy. Sustaining is not. The novelty fades, the excitement disappears, and what remains is routine. That's where most people fall off. They confuse the loss of excitement with a loss of excitement with a loss of purpose. It's not. It's just the transition from interest to discipline. Consistency builds something that intensity never can: predictability. When your actions are consistent, your results become more stable. You reduce variability. You remove randomness. You know what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how it's going to be done. That level of control eliminates uncertainty. And with less uncertainty, decision-making becomes faster and more efficient. On the other side, inconsistency creates friction. You spend more time thinking about what to do, when to start, how to begin. You waste energy on decisions that should already be automatic. That friction slows everything down. It makes simple tasks feel more difficult than they actually are. And over time, that accumulated friction leads to avoidance. The difference between progress and regret is not talent, intelligence, or opportunity. It's whether you can maintain a pattern long enough for results to compound. Most people never reach that point because they keep interrupting their own process. They start, stop, restart, and repeat the cycle until they lose interest entirely. You don't need more effort. You need fewer interruptions. Remove the gaps, maintain the pattern, let the repetition do its work. Most people operate in a state of partial commitment and then act surprised when nothing changes. They want results, but only under conditions that feel comfortable. They want transformation, but without fully stepping into the identity required to achieve it. That split is where everything breaks down, because the moment you leave space for compromise, you guarantee inconsistency. There is no such thing as almost disciplined. There is no version of you that is kind of focused or trying to be consistent that produces meaningful results. Those are transitional states at best, but most people treat them as permanent positions. They sit in that space, convincing themselves they're improving while their actions remain unchanged. Progress is not measured by intention, it's measured by alignment. Either your behavior matches the identity you claim, or it doesn't. The idea of gradual transformation is often misunderstood. Yes, results take time, but the decision to fully commit does not. That shift is immediate. You don't slowly decide to take control of your life. You make that decision once, and then everything you do either supports it or contradicts it. The timeline of results is gradual. The standard you set for yourself is not. Half measures create internal conflict. You set expectations, then violate them. You plan actions, then avoid them. You create structure, then ignore it. That constant contradiction weakens your sense of control. You begin to doubt your own decisions, not because they're wrong, but because you don't follow through. And once that doubt becomes familiar, it limits how far you're willing to push yourself. There is also a tendency to maintain fallback options. You keep alternatives in place just in case it gets too hard, just in case you lose motivation, just in case things don't go as planned. Those fallback options are the reason you never fully commit. They give you an exit, and when pressure increases, you take it. Not because you have to, but because it's available. High-level performers remove those exits. They close the gap between decision and action. When they choose a direction, they align everything around it: time, energy, focus. There's no parallel path, no secondary plan that allows for retreat. That level of commitment forces adaptation. You either rise to meet the standard or you fail visibly. And that pressure is exactly what drives change. You also need to understand that identity is not flexible at the highest level. You cannot switch between being disciplined and undisciplined depending on the situation and expect to build anything meaningful. Every time you step outside your standard, you weaken it. Not temporarily, structurally, because you're proving to yourself that the standard is optional. This is where most people lose control. They treat discipline like a tool they can use when convenient, instead of a baseline they operate from. They turn it on when they feel like improving and turn it off when it becomes uncomfortable. That approach guarantees inconsistency. You're not building identity, you're managing behavior. The shift happens when you stop seeing discipline, focus, and consistency as tasks and start seeing them as non-negotiable traits. Not something you do, but something you are. That distinction changes everything. Because once it becomes part of your identity, there is no decision to make. You don't ask whether you should act, you act, because it's aligned with who you are. At that point, the process becomes more efficient. You remove internal conflict. You eliminate hesitation. You reduce the need for constant decision-making. Your actions become more direct, more consistent, more controlled, not because you're trying harder, but because you remove the option to do otherwise. You either step fully into that identity or you remain where you are. There's no middle position that produces results. You can delay the decision, justify the hesitation, maintain the illusion of progress, but none of that changes the outcome. The standard is clear. The path is defined. The only variable left is whether you commit to it completely. So here's the truth you don't want but need. Your identity is not something you discover. It's something you construct brutally through daily proof. You don't talk your way into power. You act your way into it. And if your actions don't match your desired identity, then you don't have a goal. You have a fantasy. Fix your language. Command your mind. Execute daily. Or stay exactly where you are. Weak, inconsistent, and replaceable. The choice isn't complicated. It's just uncomfortable. And most of you, you're not willing to pay that price.